Good evening. Come on in and grab a seat, folks. You gotta love Wallowa County. I mean, where else would you go in the world where it's a buzzy night for poetry? This is so exciting. So thank you so much for coming. I'm excited. Are you excited? We're gonna have some fun. So I want to welcome you to the official finale of Fishtrap's NEA Big Read. I'm so glad you're here for what promises to be a wonderful night of gratitude, joy, and inspiration. I also want to thank all of you who are joining us online. This is why these funny iPads are up in front. So thank you for joining us, and we wish you were here. I know some of you, by the way, I can't see you, which is kind of nice for me, but well, you're all beautiful. I didn't mean that, but I was curious, you can buy applause. How many of you are here from Wallowa County tonight? Can you give me a sign of applause? Great. How many of you came from our partner in Union County in the Big Read? Nice. How many of you came from farther afield just for tonight? That's pretty awesome, so thank you so much. I know we've got some folks from like the Midwest online, but we won't ask them to clap, so here you go. So my name is Shannon McNerney. I'm the executive director of Fishtrap. I have the pleasure of being its executive director for the past 8 years. This is my 9th Big Read, but Fishtrap has had the honor of participating in the NEA Big Read program almost every year since its inception in 2006. As a matter of fact, Fishtrap was one of the first communities that were part of that program, and I want to acknowledge one person in particular who I know is in the audience this year who helped make that happen, which is Elizabeth Oliver. So could you all give her a big hand? This program for us is a natural extension of our belief in the power of words. The NEA and Arts Midwest created a program underlying that very belief, that good writing, from novels of all stripes to memoirs to short stories or poetry, can help us all broaden our understanding of ourselves and our neighbors when we share the experience of reading them together. The goals of the NEA Big Read are to inspire meaningful conversations, celebrate local creativity, elevate a wide variety of voices and perspectives, and build stronger connections in each community the program serves, and it's been doing that very well. Each year, we work with many of you to select a book that will resonate, yes, entertain, and hopefully challenge the way you think about the world around you, even just a little bit. Then we create events that help expand the experience of the world the authors of these marvelous books have created through a variety of our own locally created events. This year is no different. We've held readings and workshops, book discussions, and we even did a youth playwriting and performance workshop last week in Lustine. We've also given away over 600 books in Wallowa and Union County, and to top it all off, yeah, well, you know what's coming. So before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge a few of the many, many organizations who have helped us with this year's Big Read. First off, we need to acknowledge the NEA and Arts Midwest for creating and administering this national program. It's more important now than it ever has been, because books, as you know, can sometimes be challenged. So it's important that we share that experience together. I also want to acknowledge that the Big Read receives funding from the Oregon Arts Commission's Arts Builds Community Grant. We are one of a very few organizations statewide that receive this funding, and I want to thank them for that also. Then, please get ready to clap. We want to thank our local sponsors, including Community Bank, the Book Loft, the Bronze Antler, and Kokanee Inn. Please join me in thanking them. Finally, our event partners. This program just keeps getting bigger every year. This year, we have partnered with the amazing folks at Cook Memorial Library in Union County, Eastern Oregon University, Art Center East, Joseph Charter School, Enterprise School, Wallowa School, the Alt-Ed School, Union County Schools, and all of our local libraries for their participation. Please thank them. Yes. And of course, all of you. This is why we do this, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. So now, sit back, relax, turn off your cell phones. I'm seeing some lights out there, and be present. Be present for an evening of gratitude, joy, and delight. So let's get started with a good old and good friend, Fishtrap's 2023-24 writer-in-residence, Jason Graham. Jason McNeil Graham, yeah, too bad he's not popular, folks. I don't know what to tell you. Better known as MOsley WOtta, is a Windy City heartland transplant living in Central Oregon. MOsley's work spans nearly 2 decades of exploration in multi-mediums, including writing, painting, performance, video. MOsley WOtta's music, literary performances, and visual art have been featured internationally, including at the Living Future Com, TEDx, Fishtrap, Oregon Community Foundation, Goddard College, High Desert Museum, the StreetCon Dubai, Valley Forge Fiesta, Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, and the Portland Art Museum. Jason is an Arts Fellow, Beautification and Cultural Award recipient, an Individual Artist Fellowship recipient, Fields Fellowship recipient, City Club Community Leader honoree, Oregon Slam Poetry Champion, Creative Laureate of Bend, Oregon, Oregon Humanities Conversation Project Leader, and a Bridging Oregon North Coast Facilitator, and our friend. Please welcome Jason Graham to the OK Theater stage.
Hello, good evening, hello. Hi. We should just shorten the accolades. It should just say ego savant is what it should say on there. And it's well over. It's well over. I've been doing this for a minute, so that must be a little outdated because it's more than 2 decades, I'm happy to say. It's great when you can clock more time on this planet. This is a magical place for me. This is a magical experience to be here. The active imagination seems to be effective. The dreaming seems to be very real. When I come to this particular place, when I'm paying attention, something usually winks at me. And one of the winking things that happened last time I was coming in here, I live in Redmond, Oregon, and I was driving on the road here, and I saw a great blue heron, and just perched in that sort of prehistoric, majestic way that they just hang out. And I pulled over to the side of the road, but I knew it was wrong the way I know peanut butter after a certain period of time on the clock is wrong. And like there's a kind of internal knowing of like, this isn't what I should be doing, but it feels good, so I'm gonna go for it. And like I pulled over, and instantly that bird took off, and it flew in a way that it was going with the flow, and I was going the opposite direction. And I was like, oh shit, as I was coming in here, because there's something about being at the base of these mountains. Now, I'm not trying to tell you about the place that you live at. I'm not trying to tell you what you know already. But with the magic of being in this place, I just noticed there's a tremendous metaphor, a living, breathing metaphor in that kind of light that bounces off the top of a mountain. And then what it means to be in relationship as these sentient creatures that we are with the shadow part of it. And I come into these shadow places when I'm here, and I really have to look at some stuff. And this is a really good time to be really looking at whatever it is that your work is. And I had a hard time when I was here. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone who loves you so much and is so honest because they love you, that when they are talking to you and kind of admonishing you, everything they say, it throws like a full punch, but it lands like perfect chiropractic. You know, it's just like pow, and then you're like, oh, that was a really good point. Oh, I see my, you know. And that's how my experiences often go here. There's a tremendous amount of fear that I'm confronted with, and then also the sweetness that is on the other side of that. The truth you fear is the freedom you seek. So, and then this time coming here, I was looking for and then I was leaving town. Here's the other piece of the story. I had a whole plan that was written very nice, and we're already so far gone from that. there's a confusing expression that maybe you can, like a mental lozenge, just sort of roll with when you're feeling good, when you're feeling yourself. And some of you twinge a little bit as I say it, but right now I'm feeling myself. But I was leaving, and I had that Kung Fu chiropractic conversation with somebody that I have fallen so deeply in love with. I understand why we have so many love poems, because you just can't really express it in words, and yet you can't stop but attempt to do it over and over again. And as I was leaving, I was like, I never went to church, but I grew up in the States or whatever, so I was saying, oh, please, Lord, oh, Lord, please, oh, please. And I saw the heron for a second, and I was like, thank God, like, okay. And this time when I was coming in, there was a little mayfly of something that's not quite a dragonfly, and it looks like it should bite you, but it doesn't. It's got those like little those sort of Geiger-esque little things sticking out the back of its butt. It's not a butt, but it's kind of got these things that looks like, but I don't even know if they eat anything. I think that they're just delightfully sort of these iridescent wings, and it just hung out with me all the way here. And then when I got here, I rolled down the window, and it took off, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, like that's a good sign. And so this piece came in with some of that. Well, I'll get to the piece in a second. The other thing that happened today was I left Fishtrap after hearing these beautiful questions from these students today, and hearing Ross read, and I went to the Arrowhead chocolate spot, which they're not sponsoring me, I just happened to be there. And there was an individual in there that I wasn't expecting to see. I've just been in Oregon long enough to know that there's a thrill that happens inside you when you see black folks. There's just like, and being here for so long, you have to learn how to kind of, you can't be like, ah, because that freaks people out, is why. But that was singing inside of me. And so I walked in, the same person I was talking about before with the Kung Fu chiropractic, you might remember me bringing up a second ago. She mentioned that she really likes my smile. And it's something I've hated about myself for a very long time. And I like the part where she said, it's not the cute smile. It's not the professional put together smile. She likes it when it's just all gums. You can see the gold in where the thing went rotten. I was like, oh, I'm bad hygiene. She loves it when it's all peeled back and my skull is like, someday you will die. Like, she loves that smile. And I've wasted time at a cost. It is a cost. It's a tremendous expense. There's a lot of finance in English in our language. And this is something that I've wasted, and I've spent a lot of time wasted. It's a poor investment, hating myself. And one of the things I hated for a long time, in addition to my smile, was my hair. Because it's not quite kinky, and it's not quite straight, and it doesn't necessarily fit in the tabloids when I'm growing up, and I didn't always see a reflection of it, And I walked in, and I saw somebody that I wanted to be like, ah! And she just looked at me and she said, you have beautiful hair. And I was like, oh, mayfly shit, what the fuck is happening right now? I didn't expect this sort of great blue heron kind of epiphany to happen again right here. I didn't expect to see a black person, for one. I didn't expect somebody to compliment me for two. And I didn't expect that I would be at a point in my life where I could really just let it register, where I could just really let it sink in. And there's something about really seeing each other that is becoming, I don't know, I was just favoring this side of the room or whatever. There's something about, always the joke, there's just something about really seeing each other. What I know about this idea of blackness that I've had to take ownership of and create for myself is that black is equivalent to limitless. The way that, from my perspective, this theater goes back forever right now. It's an infinity. And that means if I'm a black artist making black art, I am a limitless artist making limitless art. And that's very important for me to be able to take ownership of such a thing as this. And I had, and such a great use of the word ownership. And I had a experience not too long ago. I just want to check my time. Okay. I had experience not too long ago, which is a story that I'd like to relay to you. that usually comes with an activity, but because of the logistics right here, we're not going to do it. But if you hear me tell the story again, maybe we'll do it at that time. I hope I get to see you again. But I think that this is a great time to really see each other. I think this is a great time to know that magic is a very real thing because you make it so. Yeah, there's like one or two witches and wizards being like, yeah. Are we burning? Are we not? What are we, you know? But it does come with a tentativeness, because then what does it also mean? Does it mean that your imagination can really manifest a thing or whatever, and then somebody throws a book of The Secret from the back and it knocks me upside the head? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an intuitive knowing that you have always been connected to, that was never limited by, or flattened by a label. It just wasn't. And we can really see each other in these really wonderful ways that this woman today saw me. And I got to say back to her as well, and just say thank you for the kindness, because it's a deep kindness. I live in Redmond, Oregon, and I had recently moved to this community, and this is a story about that. It's called The Three Birds, and I'll try to be brief here with my timeline. Okay, briefish version of the story. I was driving down this one road called Eagle Road. I grew up in Bend when it was still a small town. And in small towns, as you may very well know, you don't get the luxury of pretending like you're not going to see the person the next day. You see the person the next day. And this guy came up behind me in his car, a Sprinter, and he came up and he leaned in on the horn and was flipping me off. And that feeling, that thrill, that awful thrill that goes like lightning that goes through you when you see that aggression and you know it's directed at you. And I saw it in the rearview mirror, and I pulled off to the shoulder that was like non-existent, and he goes vroom by me. And I was so upset that he felt like he had the freedom to just act as if he wasn't ever going to see me again. And I just, as I say these things, just notice where you feel them in your body, because they're uncomfortable, what I'm going to offer here. And I followed him to his house. Some of you are like, I don't know what to deal with it, so I'm going to laugh about it. It sounds like an assault charge. So I go to the house, and I waited outside it because I didn't know, this is not a compulsion. I have something I have lots of little ticks, but I have something itching in my thing here. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I go to his house. But I didn't know what I could say with all the words and all the poems or whatever I had. I didn't know what I could possibly say that was going to improve the situation. And the town that I grew up in and the houses that I've lived in, I know sometimes you can have all smiling faces on the outside, and it can be hell inside that home. And I didn't know if I was going to contribute to violence. So I let it go. And then I had another instance not long after that where a car came up behind me, and I was going the speed limit. I was doing the right thing. This time it was a truck, and he came up behind me, and he was flipping me off because I wasn't going fast enough. We were damn near a school zone. And this time I felt gifted with that like, oh, this happened before and I missed my opportunity, but it's happening now, and now I know what to do or whatever. And this time I slowed down below the speed limit and waited until he could just squeak by me. And then when he squeaked by me, I gave him like this, as I am, effeminate and awkward hand sort of wave, like, bye, baby. I gave him this sort of, and then that felt good for like 2 seconds. And then that didn't feel good anymore. And I know that didn't do anything, not the thing I wanted to do with that. And then I went through some things, and I ended up moving to Redmond. And I was so caught up in thinking about all these things that I wasn't paying attention on these roads that I don't know very well. And I almost slammed into this person. They laid on the horn, and I realized I was at fault. And as they were going by me, they flipped me off. And I thought about that first time, and I thought about that second time, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not suggesting that you do this thing. This is not a commodity or a formula for you to repeat. I don't have a product here in this way, but I followed this person, and I followed them, and I followed them, and I followed them. I tried to sort of say, I'm so sorry out of my window, but they just kept going. And when they finally pulled over to the side of the road, I have all these voices in my head. You know, what are you doing? You know, you could get shot, blah, 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 blah. But this wasn't some dude in a truck. This wasn't some dude in a Sprinter. This was a woman that I was following onto now some back road in Redmond that I don't know very well. And I get out of the car, and I've got these reflective sunglasses on. You know, I've had glasses since I was like 8, 9, something like this. So this is all, you know, it's all Monet, you know. And so like but I do this so she can see my eyes. And I go like this so she can see my hands. And I come up to her and I say, I get out of my car and I come to her car and I say, hey, I am so sorry back there. I just want you to know, I am so sorry. That was my fault. And she goes, oh, sweetheart, my either dad or grandfather taught me to flip everybody off. And she tried to hit me with humor. And I said, for something inside me still wasn't like satisfied. And I said, no, I need you to not take this anger any further. And you know, I mean, this is the sentiment. That's not the exact quote, but this is the sentiment. And I started to feel like what I'm feeling right now. I started to blub. I was like, I couldn't hardly talk. And she reached out of her car, her little truck that she had, and she pulled me into her window, and she said, oh, bless you. And she hugged me. There are some flags that go up and down my street that don't make me feel safe. There's a whole bunch of this and that doesn't make me feel safe, and all my stupid hair and all my stupid smile that I'm wrestling with inside that doesn't make me feel safe all the time. And this person really took the time to really see me. And this question was given to me by my friend Tammy Jo Wilson, who's just a tremendous individual who lives here in Oregon, so check her out when you get a chance. And as this becomes talks and things, she says, really the question that I think you're trying to get at is, what are we willing to risk to see each other's humanity? And it was a risk that I took. That was a tremendous risk that she took. That was a tremendous risk that she took. So I just want to leave you with this. In this magical place, in all this feeling, there's so much more than these 5 senses that we're dealing with. So this is just an excerpt of that piece. And also to validate, like, I do write poems and I don't just pontificate and cry publicly. But that's good too. And it goes like this. This poetry's a code we speak that fools like me submit, which to offer but an inkling to make more accurate. There is so much more than 5 senses for those more sensitive. So much more than meets the eye when Morpheus visits. An epitaph, an epilogue, the setting suns like this. This world was here well long before we ever learned to fight it. No lips, no tongue will dialogue, each creature speaking iris. The ghosts are real, the bones are real, and we are a breathing hybrid. Feel me, far beyond the 5. Thank you.
So think about this, we get 2 more weeks with him with our kids this year, so it's a pretty exciting thing. So now I'm going to get a little bit personal. I'm only being slightly hyperbolic, and actually I just met someone else, my friend Ash, who said the same thing when I say that Ross Gay's Book of Delights saved me during the pandemic. I've actually told some of you in here know I've said this before. I've given this book away to many of you. I've treated this magical book of micro essays like a little mini devotional during the first months of lockdown, reading 2 or 3 almost every day. Thanks to them, I actually started to look for my own little moments of delight in those unprecedented times. I started writing again. Then I began to give the books away to people I loved. So when the catalog of unabashed gratitude became an option for the Big Read, bringing poetry to this program for the first time to this county seemed daunting. Well, we were all a little scared. We didn't know, would you guys show up for a poet on a night that snows in February? And apparently you will, except it's March, but there it is. But doing it with Ross's help seemed like we were working together with a trusted friend. So let me introduce you to our newest friend, poet and author, Ross Gay. This is a line from his website that I love. It says, Ross Gay is interested in joy. Ross Gay is curious about joy. Ross Gay studies, wants to understand joy. Ross Gay studies joy, something like that. Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry, Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Beholding, winner of the PEN American Literary Gene Stein Award, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. In addition to his poetry, Ross has released 3 collections of essays. The Book of Delights was released in 2019 and was a New York Times bestseller. Inciting Joy was released in 2022, and his newest collection, The Book of More Delights, there's so many more delights, was released in the September of 2023. Please give a giant Wallowa County welcome to Ross Gay.
Thank you. How are you doing? Good. That was so beautiful. Thank you for that intro. And yeah, that was, it's good to be here. I actually want to read something just to kind of carry on the previous reading was so beautiful. Goddamn. And I'm going to read this. It's an essay. So I'm glad to be here. I'm going to read a little bit from this book of this catalog of unabashed gratitude. I'm going to mostly read from that, but I want to read a couple essays too from this Book of Delights and Book of More Delights, if that's okay. Okay. This is called Cocoa Baby, and I'll have to interrupt myself, as I do periodically. Cocoa Baby. I caught sight of myself this morning in the mirror applying coconut oil to my body. I was bent over with one foot on the edge of the tub, rubbing the oil into my calves, which have become a particularly ashen part of my body, particularly visibly ashen, as it's summer, which I'm trying to address with a loofah and the oil, abundantly applied. If you want to get way further into this, and I think you do, I recommend Simone White's essay, Lotion, in her book of Being Dispersed. This time of year, I am mostly brown, except for the stretch from my waist to my mid-thighs, which is a lighter shade, neither of them to be compared to a food or coffee drink. With my leg up like this, bent over, my testicles swaying just beneath my pale thigh, I wondered if, whenever I'm in this position, which is often, oiling, cutting toenails, I will always think of Toy Derricott's poem in The Undertaker's Daughter, where as a child she walks in on her abusive father standing more or less just like this, though he's shaving. Seeing his testicles dangling like that, she thinks they are his udders, the, quote, female part he hid, something soft and unprotected I shouldn't see, end quote. I watched myself rub the oil liberally on my body while I was still wet, which my dear friend recently taught me keep some of the moisture in. I got my calves, then my feet, lacing my fingers into my toes. When doing this, I often recall another friend who, watching me put lotion on my feet one day, smiled and said, "Good job." Up to my thighs, inner and outer, around to my ass, which seems to want to break out some when I'm sitting too much. Then I get both arms and shoulders, my chest and stomach, and what I can reach of my back. Usually I oil my face with the residual oil on my hands, and I finish by oiling my penis. Not always last, but often, which I wouldn't read too much into one way or the other. Today, when I watched myself, particularly when I was oiling my chest and stomach, which I do kind of by self-hugging, I was thinking, how many bodies of mine are in this body? This nearly 43-year-old body stationed on this plane for the briefest. I could see, as I always can, probably kind of dysmorphically, my biggest body, when it was 260 pounds in a battering ram and felt sort of impervious. I could also see my 12-year-old self, chubby and gangly and ashamed. And of course, the baby me, who I don't remember being, though I have seen pictures. When you watch yourself in the mirror oiling yourself like this, wrapping your arms around yourself, jostling yourself a little, it is easy or easier to see yourself as a child, and maybe even a child you really love, It is easy, if you decide it, which might be hard, to let the oiling be of the baby you. Or at least I thought so today, looking at myself, whom I am so often not nice to. But the baby you oil until he shines. I know that's like to me it is, a moving poem, an essay, and I'm going to change the mood by telling you I once read that to a group of high school students. The biggest reading I had ever given, maybe I've ever given, it was like 800 high school students, and for some fucking stupid reason I thought I should read this essay where I talk about my fucking balls and my dick at the same time. And I swear to God, the first time I say the word testicles, these children, they like audibly gagged. And they were saying things like, no! I was like, wait, hang on, this is moving. This is... This is called To My Best Friend's Big Sister. I reference two things that maybe I don't need to tell you what they are, but one is a song called It Takes Two by Rob Bass and Easy Rock, which is 1989-ish. And the other thing is this device we used to listen to music on called a Sony Walkman. To my best friend's big sister. One never knows, does one, how one comes to be standing most ways to naked in front of one's pal's big sister, who has, simply by telling me to, gotten me to shed all but the scantest flap of fabric and twirl before her like a rotisserie chicken as she observes and offers thoughtful critique on my just pubescent physique, which is not a thing to behold. What with my damp trunks clinging to my damp crotch, and proportion and grace are words the definition of which I don't yet know. Nor did I ask the mini-skirted scientist sitting open-legged and now shoeless on my mom's couch, though it may have been just this morning while chucking papers I heard through the Rob Bass and DJ Easy Walk, pulsing my Walkman, a mourning dove, struggling, snared in the downspout's mouth. And without lowering the volume or missing a verse, I crinkled the rusted aluminum trap enough that with a little wriggle, it was free. And did not at once wobble to some power line, but sat on my hand and looked at me for at least one verse of It Takes Two, sort of bobbing its head and cooing once or twice before flopping off. But that seems very long ago now, as I pirouette my hairless and shivering warble of acne and pudge, burning a hole in the rug as Big Sis tosses off Greek and Latin words like pectorals and gluteus maximus, standing to show me what she means with her hands on my love handles. And now I can see myself trying to add some gaudy flourish to this memory to make of it a fantasy, which is why I linger, hoping to misrecall the child me, make of me someone I wasn't, make of this experience the beginning of a new life. Gilded doors kicked open, blaring trombones, a full beard, Isaac Hayes singing in the background, and me thundering forth on the wild steed of emergent manhood. But I think this child was not that child. Obscuring as he was his breasts by tucking his hands into his armpits, and having never even made love to himself yet, was not really a candidate for much, besides the chill of a minor shame that he would forget for 15 years. One of what would prove to be many such shames, stitched together like a quilt, with all its just legible patterning, which could be a thing heavy and warm to be buried in, or instead might be held up to the light, where we see the threads barely holding, so human and frail, so beautiful and sad and small from this remove. This is called Ode to Buttoning and Unbuttoning My Shirt. And there's a line in here, I say this is not something to be taken lightly. And it's a line that's sort of like invoking it's definitely referencing, or I'm trying to invoke the poet, the Turkish poet Nazım Hikmet, who was incarcerated for years and years, and he was a political prisoner in Turkey. And he would write these things. He'd be talking about his beloved, or he'd be talking about, the trees or something, the landscape. And he would say, this is, something like, this is not something to be taken lightly. Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. No one knew, or at least I didn't know they knew, what the thin discs threaded here on my shirt might give me in terms of joy. This is not something to be taken lightly. The gift of buttoning one's shirt slowly, top to bottom, or bottom to top. Or sometimes the buttons will be on the other side, and I'm a woman that morning. Slipping the glass through its slot, I tread differently that day, or some of it, anyway. My conversations are different, and the car bomb slicing the air and the people in it for a quarter mile, and the honeybee's legs furred with pollen mean another thing to me than on the other days, which too have been drizzled in this simplest of joys, and this world of spaceships and subatomic this and that. 2, maybe 3 times a day, some days I have the distinct pleasure of slowly untethering the one side from the other, which is like unbuckling a stack of vertebrae with delicacy, for I must only use the tips of my fingers with which I will one day close my mother's eyes. This is as delicate as we can be in this life, practicing like this, giving the raft of our hands to the clumsy spider and blowing soft until she lifts her damp heft and crawls off. We practice like this, pushing the seed into the earth like this first in the morning, and then at night we practice sliding the bones home. Thank you. I just want to read this. I don't know if, I'm sure no one here knows the Book Loft. Man, what a good bookstore. I was in there for a little bit today, and I was just like, God damn. Yes, the Book Loft. And yeah, I love these little places, these little independent bookstores that are such hubs. I could tell, I was sort of sitting in the back corner, and I could just tell kind of people coming in the way that I could kind of tell from afar that it's a hub. It's a place where people know each other and are cared for, actually, is the word. So this is for the Book Loft. And it's called, Friends, Let Us Do Our Best Not to Leave This Life Having Not Loved What We Love Enough. I just want to give you a heads up. I kind of start this essay in a bad mood, but you'll see. And I'm talking about another beautiful bookstore in Philadelphia called Joseph Fox. Friends, let us do our best not to leave this life having not loved what we love enough. I learned today from Dave that Joseph Fox Bookshop has gone out of business. I hope it wasn't the pandemic, by which is really meant the lockdown policies that made the rich richer and kicked the shit out of most everyone else. I just looked it up. It was. Anyway, there is a cliche circulating these days like genital warts, meant to suggest something was jarring or upsetting or super heart-stirring or something. I assure you someone is saying it at this very moment. I hate that I, too, am about to say it, but the news that Joseph Fox had closed felt like a gut punch. When Dave said it, I actually put my hand on my tummy and I said, ugh, and no, and why? To which Dave shrugged and made a sad and sympathetic face because he loved the store too. Joseph Fox was a beautifully curated bookstore for my tastes, which needn't be yours. Lots of essays and nonfiction, lots of poems and novels, and nearly whole runs of certain presses stuff. I think a bunch of the New York Review books, that whole Melville House Last Interview series, I think I remember. Probably some of those Petite Penguin classics, and a bunch of the stout Archipelago bricks, books with which to make a house that won't blow down. They had a gardening section where I once got a seed-saving book, and an art section where I got a book of Annie Albers's work. It was small, the back room was very close to the front room, and the hallway between them was often packed, encouraging lots of excuse me's and after yous and such. Those which are themselves among the products, the gifts of the small bookstore. We put those after use and such, those let me grab it for yous and such, in the satchels of our hearts. Though it was a little place, a packed little place, I guarantee you there were nooks I had not yet discovered. Nota bene, a good bookstore is also a nook store, a store of nooks, inside of which await what you cannot begin to know. Also, and crucially and delightfully, a staff that could answer the hell out of your questions, which I will go ahead and declare a quality, a bounty, a beauty of the small independent bookstore. People who know their shit and are glad to share it. The last time I was in there, I was looking for W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, a book I wish I had read when it was assigned to me in college. Lots of those books. No regrets, no regrets. When I asked, the 20-something woman working behind the counter hopped off her stool and walked directly to the floor-to-ceiling shelf across the way and pulled the Du Bois from the shelf, placing the tome, and it's not too much to say, my life in my hands. Again and again they do. These booksellers, these guides, these friends, smiling. Here it is. She cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth, and soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it like a constellation, pointing. Do you see it? And I'm tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of Yellow Jacket, Sugarstone, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach. Like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance of the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body, where I ate my first fig from the hand of a man who escaped his country by swimming through the night, and maybe never said more than 5 words to me at once, but gave me figs. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. Come here, baby, he says, and blows a kiss to the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean and favoring the rocky, sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily. But no one told the fig tree or the immigrants There is a way the fig tree grows in groves. It wants, it seems, to hold us. Yes, I am anthropomorphizing, God damn it. I have twice in the last 30 seconds rubbed my sweaty forearm into someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful, eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most which has murdered its own people. This is true. We're feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and Ninth. Strangers, maybe, never again. Thank you. This is called Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands. Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands, which today, in the garden, I'd forgotten, I'd known, and more forgotten. Wait, before I keep reading, I just want to say I got to talk with these kids, these high school kids earlier today, and it was just so beautiful. The questions they asked, the conversation we got to have. I just wanted to spend such a lucky time. I feel like lucky to be here. Ode to Drinking Water from My Hands, which today, in the garden, I'd forgotten, I'd known, and more forgotten I'd learned, and was taught this by my grandfather, who, in the midst of arranging and watering the small bouquets on mostly the freshest graves, saw my thirst, and cranked the rusty red pump, bringing forth from what sounded like the gravelly throat of an animal a frigid torrent. And with his hands he made a lagoon from which he drank, and then I drank, before he cranked again, making of my hands now a fountain, in which I can see the silty bottom drifting while I drink, and my grandfather waters the flowers on the graves, among which are his and his wife's, unfinished and patient, glistening after he rinses the bird shit from his wife's, and the pump exhales, and I drink to the bottom of my fountain and join him in his work. And this poem is called Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. There's one thing to know, I guess, which is that in the beginning of this poem, I talk about an orchard, a community orchard in Bloomington, which is a real community orchard. You can kind of look it up. It's called the Bloomington Community Orchard. Just a beautiful place. But you'll hear me talking about this orchard in here. I think that's all you need to know. Buckle in. This is going to take a minute. Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. Friends, will you bear with me today? For I have awakened from a dream in which a robin made with its shabby wings a kind of veil, behind which it shimmied and stomped something from the south of Spain, its breast aflare, looking me dead in the eye from the branch that grew into my window, coochie-cooing my chin. The bird shuffling its little talons left and then right, while the leaves bristled against the plaster wall, two of them drifting onto my blanket, while the bird opened and closed its wings like a matador giving up on murder, jutting its beak, turning a circle and flashing again the ruddy bombast of its breast, by which I knew upon waking it was telling me in no uncertain terms to bellow forth the tubas and sousaphones, the whole rusty brass band of gratitude not quite dormant in my belly. It said so in a human voice. Bellow forth! And who among us could ignore such odd and precise counsel? Hear ye, I am here to holler that I have hauled tons, by which I don't mean lots, I mean tons, of cow shit, and stood ankle deep in swales of maggots swirling the spent beer grains the brewery man was good enough to dump off, holding his nose, for they smell very bad, but make the compost writhe giddy and lick its lips, twirling dung with my pitchfork again and again. With hundreds and hundreds of other people, we dreamt an orchard this way, furrowing our brows and hauling our wheelbarrows and sweating through our shirts. And less than a year later, there was a party at which trees were sunk into the well-fed earth, one of which, a Liberty apple, after being watered in, was tamped by a baby barefoot with a bow hanging in her hair, biting her lip in her joyous work. And friends, this is the realest place I know. It makes me squirm like a worm. I am so grateful. You could ride your bike there or roller skate or catch the bus. There's a fence and a gate twisted by hand. There's a fig tree taller than you in Indiana. It will make you gasp. It might make you want to stay alive even. Thank you. And thank you for not taking my pal when the engine of his mind dragged him to swig fistfuls of Xanax and a bottle or two of booze. And thank you for taking my father a few years after his own father went down. Thank you, Mercy. Mercy, thank you for not smoking meth with your mother. Oh, thank you. Thank you for leaving and for coming back, and thank you for what inside my friend's love bursts like a throng of roadside goldenrod gleaming into the world, likely hauling a shovel with her like one named a.k.a. with hands big as a horse's, and who, like one named a.k.a. will laugh time to time till the juice runs from her nose. Oh, thank you for the way a small thing's wail makes the milk, or what once was milk in us, gather into horses huckle-buckling across a field. And thank you, friends, when last spring the hyacinth bells rang and the crocuses flaunted their upturned skirts, and a quiet roved the beehive which, when I entered, were snugged 2 or 3 dead fist-sized clutches of bees between the frames, almost clinging to one another. This one's tiny head pushed into another's tiny wing, one's forelegs resting on another's face, the translucent paper of their wings fluttering beneath my breath, and when a few dropped to the frames beneath, honey. And after falling down to cry, everything's glacial shine. And thank you, too. And thanks for the corduroy couch I have put you on. Put your feet up. Here's a light blanket, a pillow, dear ones, for I think this is going to be long. I can't stop my gratitude, which includes, dear reader, you for staying here with me, for moving your lips just so as I speak. Here's a cup of tea. I've spooned honey into it. And thank you, the tiny bee's shadow, perusing these words as I write them. And the way my love talks quietly when in the hive. So quietly, in fact, you cannot hear her, but only notice barely her lips moving in conversation. Thank you, what does not scare her in me, but makes her reach my way. Thank you, the love she is, which hurts sometimes. And the time she misremembered elephants in one of my poems, which, oh, here they come, garlanded with morning glory and wisteria blooms, trombones all the way down to the river. Thank you, the quiet in which the river bends around the elephant's solemn trunk, polishing stones, floating on its gentle back, the flock of geese flying overhead. And to the quick and gentle flocking of men, to the old lady falling down on the corner of Fairmount and 18th, holding patiently with the softest parts of their hands her cane and purple hat, gathering for her the contents of her purse and touching her shoulder and elbow. Thank you, too, the cockeyed basketball court on which, in a half-court 3-on-3, we old heads made of some runny-nosed kids a shambles. And the 61-year-old, after flipping a reverse layup off a backdoor cut from my no-look pass to seal the game, ripped off his shirt and threw punches at the gods and hollered at the kids to admire the pacemaker's scar grinning across his chest. Thank you, the glad accordion's wheeze in the chest. Thank you, the bagpipes. Thank you to the woman barefoot in a gaudy dress for stopping her car in the middle of the road, and the tractor trailer behind her, and the van behind it, whisking a turtle off the road. Thank you, God of gaudy. Thank you, paisley panties. Thank you, the organ up my dress. Thank you, the sheer dress you wore, kneeling in my dream at the creek's edge, and the light swimming through it, the coy kissing halos into the glassy air, the room in my mind with the blinds drawn where we nearly injure each other, crawling into the shawl of the other's body. Thank you when I just say it plain, we fuck each other dumb. And you, again you, for the true kindness it has been for you to remain awake with me like this, nodding time to time, or making that noise, which I take to mean yes, or I understand, or please go on, but not too long. Or why are you spitting so much? Or easy, tiger, hands to yourself. I'm excitable. I'm sorry. I'm grateful. I just want us to be friends now, forever. Take this bowl of blackberries from the garden. The sun has made them warm. I picked them just for you. I promise I will stay on my side of the couch. And thank you, the baggie of dreadlocks I found in a drawer while washing and folding the clothes of our murdered friend. The photo in which his arms slung around the sign to the Trail of Silences. Thank you, the way before he died, he held his hands open to us. For coming back in a waft of incense, or in the shape of a boy in another city looking from between his mother's legs, or disappearing in the stacks after brushing by. For moseying back in dreams where, seeing us lost and scared, he put his hand on our shoulders and pointed us to the temple across town. And thank you to the man all night long hosing a mist on his early bloomed peach tree so that the hard frost not waste the crop. The ice in his beard and the ghosts lifting from him when the warming sun told him, sleep now. Thank you, the ancestor who loved you before she knew you by smuggling seeds into her braid for the long journey. Who loved you before he knew you by putting a walnut tree in the ground. Who loved you before she knew you by not slaughtering the land. Thank you, who did not bulldoze the ancient grove of dates and olives, who sailed his keys softly into the ocean and walked home, who did not fire, who did not plunge the head into the toilet, who said, stop, don't do that, who lifted some broken someone up, who volunteered. The way a plant birthed of the reseeding plant is called a volunteer. Like the plum tree that marched beside the raised bed in my garden, like the arugula that marched itself between the blueberries, nary a bayonet, nary an army, nary a nation, which usage of the word volunteer, familiar to gardeners the wide world, made my pal shout, oh, and dance, and plunge his knuckles into the lush soil before gobbling 2 strawberries and digging a song from his guitar made of wood from a tree someone maybe planted. Thank you. Thank you, Zinnia and Gooseberry, Rebecca and Pawpaw, Ashmead's Kernel, Coxcomb and Scarlet Runner, Feverfew and Lemon Balm. Thank you, Knitbone and Sweetgrass and Sunshoke and False Indigo, whose petals stammered apart by bumblebees. Good Lord, please give me a minute. And Moonglow and Catkin and Crookneck and Painted Tongue and Seed Pod and Johnny Jump Up. Thank you, what in us rackets glad, what glad rackets us. And thank you to this knuckle-headed heart, this pelican heart, this gap-toothed heart flinging open its gaudy maw to the sky. Oh clumsy, oh bumblefucked, oh giddy, oh dumbstruck, oh rickshaw, oh goat twisting its head at me from my peach tree's highest branch, balanced impossibly, gobbling the last fruit, its tongue working like an engine, a lone sweet drop tumbling by some miracle into my mouth like the smell of someone I've loved. Heart like an elephant screaming at the bones of her dead. Heart like the lady on the bus dressed head to toe in gold, the sun shivering her shiny boots, singing Erykah Badu to herself, leaning her head against the window. And thank you too, the way my father one time came back in a dream by plucking the 2 cables beneath my chin like a bass fiddle strings. And he played me until I woke singing. No kidding, I was singing and smiling. Thank you. Thank you, stumbling into the garden where the Juneberry's flowers had burst open like the bells of French horns. The lily my mother and I planted oozed into the air. The bazillion ants labored in their earthen workshops below, and the collard greens waved in the wind like the sails of ships, and the wasps swam in the mint bloom's viscous swill. And you, again you, dear friends, for hanging tight, for I know I can be long-winded sometimes. I want so badly to rub the sponge of gratitude over everything, including you, which, yes, can be awkward. The suds going down your collar behind your glasses. Soon it will be over, which is precisely what the child in my dream said, holding my hand, pointing at the roiling sea and the sky hurtling our way like so many buffalo, who said, "It's much worse than we think, and sooner." To whom I said, "No duh, child in my dreams. What do you think this singing and shuddering is? What this screaming and reaching and dancing and crying is, other than loving what every second goes away? Goodbye, I mean to say. And thank you, every day. Thank you."
Here.
Oh, thank you.
I've done nothing. Well, what do you, thank you. So before we get started, we're going to have a little interview here, a little talk. But before we do, if you have, some of you were handed some note cards, and if you have a question for Ross, go ahead and write it down if you haven't already, and pass it down to the edge of the aisle. We've got the fabulous, fantastic Fishtrap staff. If you just kind of give a little wave, they'll come and grab your question for you. So you can do that if you like. But I have some questions for you. So are you ready? You mentioned it earlier. We had quite the conversation with some students today from Joseph Charter and Wallowa this morning. Are there any of those students here? Can you raise your hand or clap or yell?
Oh, good.
Yay, all right, good. Boy, folks in the county, you should feel really good about the state of the student suite that you have here. They were amazing. They set the bar pretty high for questions. One of the students this morning asked you why you were inspired by, and I was going to ask that, or what you were inspired by, who you were inspired by. And you mentioned quite a few names, but there were two that stood out to me, which was the former, most recent poet laureate, Joy Harjo, and Richard Pryor.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that combination, so I was wondering if you might want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Joy Harjo, her work, I mean, that book, She Had Some Horses, which I don't know if it's second or third or fourth book. That was a book, one of the many books when I was in graduate school, I remember, and I was sort of a young writer when I was sort of new as a graduate student writer. And so that was one of the books that meant so much to me. I feel like I learned a lot about, I mean, soul is one way to put it. You know, it's a deeply soulful book, but also there's sort of modes of telling. There's a kind of repetition that happens. There's the kind of music in the work is just so beautiful to me. And then Richard Pryor, there's just ways of storytelling that Pryor does, and I feel like I write a little bit about this 15-minute clip, if you haven't seen it, from Live on the Sunset Strip. It's like the last 15 minutes of the piece. And there's a thing that there's so many things to talk about what Richard Pryor can do. He has so many voices that he's able to sort of access, and so much. But he also is able to sort of tell something, and while, like, really have you going somewhere, and then just completely turn it.
Yeah.
Just completely turn it. And it's a kind of skill that in poetry, there's something called a volta. It's a turn in a poem, or in a sonnet. You know, the last two lines often, or the last 6 lines. But it's the turn in the poem. Richard Pryor has these turns, and it's not like, you might say, oh, is that a punchline? It's not a punchline with Pryor. It's something else. It's some way that he kind of rips something off, and you don't only know something differently about him or the story, it feels like you learn something about yourself, or he's showing you something about yourself. So those are some things.
I can see that
Yeah.
for sure. I was just curious how many people in here don't know who Richard Pryor is, which, we had that conversation earlier about age. So,
Yeah.
are there any other more recent, I guess, younger poets or folks that are coming up that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mentioned today in the class, I think Patrick Rosal is a poet who I adore, and whose work means a ton to me, and the poet Araceli Esquermay as well. And I mentioned Steve Scafidi as well, another poet whose work means the world to me. There's just so many, Danez Smith, Layli Long Soldier, I could just kind of go on and on and on. Ama Kojo's most recent new book is just so beautiful. Sharif Shanahan has this beautiful, I could just go on and on.
That's great. Are you all writing these down? So a few weeks ago, and I think several of you were there, we kicked off the big read with our Oregon Poet Laureate, Anis Mashkani. By the way, it's still available online, so you can check that out if you weren't able to be there. He told us that Catalog was one of his favorite poetry collections, and he said that it's one he can't read without crying.
Oh, wow.
And he read a couple of your poets. I mean, he actually did a disclaimer, I'm sorry if I cry in advance. So I just was curious, how does it feel to know that you're that kind of an inspiration for other writers? What does that do to you? How do you process that?
I just feel grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel lucky and grateful.
That's great. It was a powerful thing to see from somebody that we admire and consider a friend, to see
who I admire.
movement. Yeah.
I love Anis's work. Yeah.
He's going to love hearing that.
Yeah,
That's
I
pretty
love his
great.
work.
Yeah. So you didn't get to see the mountains too much today. They decided to hide. Yay, mud season. But if you haven't picked this up, we're pretty proud of this place. A little bit. It's a place we get to call home. It's complicated, and it's got an awful kind of painful history. The knowledge of the land was stolen, essentially. Not essentially, it was. Then it was also the homeland of the Nimiipuu, and it still is, the Umatilla and others for thousands of years before us. And it kind of lies at the root of what we do here, which is to cultivate with Fishtrap, is to cultivate clear thinking and good writing in and about the West. So I was curious about that. Place is such a huge part of our work here. How does place, that sense of place, inform your writing, or does it? What is that role it plays?
It's so great, that question. I was just actually texting with my friend Pat about, because I've been writing about, and I'm trying to write more, sort of a longer meditation on our garden, just the garden. And partly, the question, I think, and at some point I wanted to write a bigger book, sort of a larger book. And then over the year, I was trying to do that. And then over the years, I thought, it just became clear to me, no, actually the book that feels most compelling is the book about the garden, like in a 0.1 acre lot, this little urban city lot. Partly because there's some, and this is the thing I was talking to my buddy Pat about, like there's something about the local, the extremely local, that's very interesting to me. Like the sort of like, what is it, how do things work right here, that is not applicable, is not like sort of universal, but like how is it that these plants, these creatures, this soil, this land, etc., how does all of this behave? How does all of this what are the questions that, this land asks of us, and we can ask, and how can we be collaborative with the land? In that kind of precise, very, very local way. And partly I sort of, I've been thinking about that, and partly it has to do with this other question, like this sort of, these delights that I write, which are small. They're small things. And there's something about the scale of these questions that feel important to me, and that asking small things, observing small things, more and more, it feels, I don't know, I can't even, as you can tell, I can't exactly articulate why or what it is, but there's something about the opposite of the kind of scaling up mode that we have, that feels very much a kind of capitalistic, or I don't know, whatever, some other word for it, that intention or that inclination so often, I'm less and less and less trustful. More and more distrustful of that.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm more like, what is right here, you know?
Kind of that instant need to commodify something. You know, we found something unique. What do we do with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a beautiful
Yeah.
book by the writer Anna Singh called "Mushroom at the End of the World," and she does this beautiful. She's sort of talking about scale, and she's talking about capitalism. She's talking about scale. But you know, one of the things that a kind of the plantation model does is to just scale everything up, boom, boom, boom,
Right.
boom, boom. At which point, you know, you can kind of just destroy the world. But when you're asking, so that's my question. Like, what happens when you're actually asking you, how are you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what's right here, where it's
Yeah.
right next to you.
Yeah.
There's something, I don't know, you know, I'll figure out how to like talk more about this, better about this. But that's sort of what I'm thinking about.
So sense of home and places is important to everybody. What would you like the people here to know about the place that you call home, the place that's important to you, that you haven't maybe already said in your...
You know, I share working on the garden, in the
Yeah.
garden with my partner. I'm always learning new things. You know, the bugs are always smarter. You know, it's like on and on and on. You know that there are 10 million things. I know that there are 10 million things that I have not yet observed.
Yeah.
Even though I feel like I'm really observing a lot.
That's cool though, isn't it?
Oh, my
It's like you
God.
never run out. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. Like I try to look very closely and I just know.
Yeah.
I just know from practice. That's the practice now. Like, oh, you know now that you've only seen a teeny bit of this, you know?
Yeah. I think about, you know, one of the kids asked you, this is a good segue, that asked you about the presence of nature in your poetry.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me because I was thinking about this earlier. You know, you talked about figs. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite poems in that collection too. The tomato plants to blackberries to all sorts of gardens. One of my favorite little essays in the Book of Delights is you talk about a praying mantis
Yeah.
and on a beer glass and a pint glass. You have this connection with this observational connection, but I was curious about that too. You know, what has this gardening done for you? Is it filled your creative life in a way too? Or, you know, you talked a little bit earlier with us about how it kind of shuts your brain off, but, you know, talk about that role.
Oh God, I mean, that thing itself, because if you're trying to listen to what the garden is talking about,
Yeah.
you really have to sort of pay close attention in all these ways that, you know, otherwise you might not otherwise, you know, as simple as like where the light is coming from, how much it's going to rain, what are the temperatures in the day and at night and all this stuff, what other critters are showing up, like what's growing next to what, all of those things. But it's also like when you're in a garden and you sort of, you know, see it, you know, I love this, it just feels so moving to me. Like, you know, if you let a collard plant go to seed, and it makes, you know, I don't know, 500 seeds, you just know that those 500 seeds could make 500 collard plants, which could make another 500 seeds and another 500 plants. And
Right.
then, boom, you just learn something about abundance.
Yeah.
You learn something probably about the earth.
Yeah.
And you learn something probably also about a kind of, you learn something about the kind of, the abundance and also the kind of the care of the earth, you know, the earth's capacity to care for us, which is also feels like something you might be inclined to emulate. You know, you might be inspired to be like, oh, that's a teacher.
Yeah.
That's a teacher.
Yeah.
Oh, look at all those seeds, you know. But the other thing, you know, I could go on and on with all this, you know, is that like that as a metaphor as well. It's like so a writing, you know, like we talk about metaphors, and metaphor just means to carry across. That's what a metaphor is, something that carries something across to something else. That seed is such a beautiful metaphor, you know, that it's not only a thing that's the size of like a little dot, the period on a piece of paper, but that it's also inside of that is like all that we could eat.
Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking about the tomato piece here, you know, my journey with gardening, which I will not tell you all about, but is coming from a place that's Willamette Valley, lower elevation, moving to Joseph and discovering that growing tomatoes is a fool's errand. But it taught me about failure.
Yeah.
And that failure is a good thing too, that through each of that is learning, which
Yeah.
is also part of creative life. I
Yeah,
think.
totally.
Yeah. So the big read, which I know you've.
Well, actually, failure.
Yeah,
I
let's
would
talk about
say,
failure.
I would even say that it's just taught you.
Yeah,
I mean, it might be a bummer that the tomatoes didn't happen.
right.
Or maybe it's definitely a bummer, maybe. But there's something about like, and to bring it over to writing, the connection to writing. The older I get, the more I'm trying to be like, that's just something I did, which is going to help me know how to do the next thing.
Exactly, it's
You know?
iterative. Kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah. So it's like, it's another like part. It's just more observation. Oh, okay. It's another question that I've learned something from that question, and then I'll make another thing with that as information in my question.
I can grow serrano peppers.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
What I've learned.
Yeah, exactly,
That's what
exactly.
we figured out. So I wanted to talk a little about the big read just quickly because the whole mission of this big read is about the active sharing and experience of good read in a community with each other. You've talked about community. I did a deep dive in even when you were talking about the Book of Delights and all of these things about community. How does community, the sense of community, connection, inform your work?
Yeah.
And how do you actually think about community? What would you like to leave us with as you think about community and creativity?
Well, I mean, so many things. Like I could say that I'm always writing in community. I share my work. People give me advice, feedback. I'm utterly dependent on that. I also feel absolutely that I'm writing in community with the people whose work I adore, people whose work has made me, And when I mean in community, I don't only mean that I'm inspired by it. I mean that without it, I would not know how to write at all.
Yeah.
So the older I get, again, the more like beloved, how lucky it feels when I read something and that I wrote, and I'm like, oh, that's Gerald Stern, exactly, or oh, that's Lucille Clifton, or that on and on and on.
Yeah.
It happens all the time, and that feels like being in community as well. But it also feels very lucky to get to share work like this, and to lately the way I've sort of been thinking about it is that, the lucky thing of writing, but it's also the lucky thing of just being in community, period, by which I mean like being in relationship and asking questions and stuff like that, is that we just get to share our questions,
Yeah. So when we started talking about doing this book, there was this big fear, and we've heard it throughout the last few weeks, so do know this. I don't understand poetry. Poetry is scary. None of you feel this way, right? You're all good now? So what advice would you have for folks who feel that way or who live with folks who feel that way?
Yeah.
What do you say to people who say they don't like or understand poetry? How do you approach that? I'm sure you hear it. You're a teacher, so yeah.
Good question. I don't find myself trying to convince people very
Right.
often, but I do think of things like, poems, any kind of ceremony or ritual or any kind of like song. I just sort of feel like there's so much sort of poetry in our lives that we might not call it poetry, but it's a poem. So I think sometimes when I have that conversation, my inclination is just to be like, oh, there's stuff that's poems that that maybe you're not thinking of as poems, or that I would think of as poems. Yeah.
Just hang out with a poet. That'll do it. Too, so, yeah. So one last question for you.
Yeah.
What gives you hope? You've talked about joy and delight and gratitude.
Yeah.
So what gives you hope?
I mean, like being around those young folks today,
Yeah.
utterly gives me hope. Yeah, just the sort of beautiful, intense, thoughtful, brilliant questions from those folks. I also, by sort of paying very close attention to the ways that we're our capacity for care for one
Yeah.
another. Which to some extent I feel like with these books of delights and other stuff, part of the job or the practice of those books is to sort of describe that. Just describe that. Point out the ways that we're so often in the midst of profound, kind of unfathomable care. But just note it and how small it can be and life-changing. Someone just offering you something that it doesn't even occur to them that it's a gesture, but the door was held open and a smile was given, or, in the smallest way. And then large ways too.
A hug through a truck window.
Yes, a hug through, exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do we have questions? I can't see. They're, oh, here they come. All right, we're running just a little bit long, so I'm going to pick a few of these questions. I'm going to pick the ones I can read. How does that sound? Oh, this is interesting. Has your work ever been censored? Have you ever faced any kind of backlash for something you've written or shared? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
We said we didn't have much time, so that made
Yeah, I'll be thinking about it as you're
Yeah,
talking.
no, that was an interesting question. I'm going to ask this because it's pretty cute. What do you use that little binder clip on your pocket for?
I don't know. I'm just trying to be prepared. I'm just trying to be prepared.
Okay. It says, I love the associative leaps in your poems. How do you make space for those when you're writing?
Gosh, it's funny because the making space for them is so kind of built into the way it doesn't feel at all like making space. But it does maybe feel like finding spaces where those leaps, that associative, those leaps and stuff can happen. Someone recently asked me a version of that question, but I realized that partly what I do, some of those leaps happen in the writing process, in the drafting process, sort of early in the writing of the poem, but sometimes they happen afterwards. Like there's a crack in the poem, and I think, oh, this wants to like take off, go very far, or wants to go somewhere, and let me go see where that is. So, yeah, I don't think it quite feels anymore like giving myself permission, but I might also be full of shit because partly I love the kind of digression, and I think of it like a cantilever, like in an architectural feature of a building that like hangs over.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of structural, like you need it to be able to stay up, and if it gets too far, the building will kind of fall over. And I'm very interested in testing that limit, like how far can you go?
Yeah.
Where people are like, okay, I completely forgot what you were talking about before,
Well, I think what we're going to do now, first off, thank you. Most of all, thank you,
yeah.
Ross. And before your hands get cold, please give another round of applause to Jason Graham. So, as we mentioned before, Ross is going to be signing books in the lobby in just a couple of minutes. If you didn't bring a copy of any of his books, our friends at the Book Loft are there, you can pick up a copy. I do want to say again, we put some signs up. The only thing our good friend has asked is don't take selfies or photos during the book signing. This is a great time to practice what we used to call internal memories. Take a visual picture with your brain and see what you can do with that, and just be present. One last thing before we head out. We did talk about all the sponsors and funders that helped us bring the Big Read to fruition. There's another group of folks, you know who I'm talking about, that I want to acknowledge. First off, the Big Read Committee, which is made up of folks from the local community that helped us put this program together. The Fishtrap, yes, thank you. The best vegan potluck makers in the land, the Fishtrap board. And most of all, and you know how I feel about these folks, we have the best Fishtrap staff in the whole world, and I especially want to call out the one person who really spearheaded and drove this program, which is our own Mike Midlow. Please give them a round of applause. And finally, just thank you. I'm grateful for each of you and can't wait to see what we come up with next. Thanks so much.